Welcome to The Spotlight, the podcast where veterans and military spouses connect and share how their military experience has transformed their lives and their businesses. Here's your host, Bob Louthen.
Hey, this is your host, Bob Louthen, founder of the VeteranCrowd Network, the network that brings veterans and veteran-led businesses together with each other and the resources they need to prosper. And you are tuning into The Spotlight. Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Spotlight on the VeteranCrowd Network. Very pleased to have as my guest, Jeffrey Schloesser. He is U.S. Army Major General retired. He's currently Executive VP at Bell Helicopter in Crystal City outside of Washington, D.C., but he was at one point in time commander of the 101st Airborne Division. He's also the author of the book Afghanistan War, Leadership in Combat in Afghanistan. General, welcome to the program. Thank you for stepping into the spotlight today.
I'm Bob. Thanks for having me step in a stoplight.
We're gonna come back and talk about our shared experiences. I'm glad to say I have something in common with you, that I was a combat engineer as well, but we'll come back to that in a little bit. Tell everybody what you're doing today, and then I'm going to dive into the book that
Sure.
that you've shared with me.
Yeah, so I retired about 11 years ago and ended up helping to design a future aircraft for the United States Army and other services called the V-280. I did that as a consultant, and then Bell came to me and said, you know what, given your background, we'd like you to open up a Washington, D.C. office with a flight simulator and a whole lot of other benefits for us old aviators. And I've been doing that for the last 4 years, and very excited to work for the future of our military.
Yeah, boy, you have so much interesting stuff that I want to talk about, because making the transition from combat engineer to aviator and the 160th and some of that, boy, we just got a lot to talk about. But you have written a book called The Afghanistan War, Leadership in Combat in Afghanistan. And you cover a couple of things, and this is a very timely conversation because we're getting out of Afghanistan today. So I found the book to be very interesting, insightful. And I think in the course of reading the book, you yourself were going through a transformation. I can kind of read it as things were going along. Can you talk a little bit about the book and, how did you discover you were an author?
Yeah, well, I'm not even sure I'm still an author, but it's been fun having written the book. So as a medium-sized or I guess middle-level officer, I guess I would say, not medium-sized is a funny pun, but I started taking my thoughts and writing a journal. I actually say in the book that I rolled up my thoughts and kind of stuck them inside of a journal at night. What I did is, when we went off to combat and when we prepared for combat with the 101st Airborne Division, and I was in command 33 months at the time, the longest serving commander of that division. I found that I was writing things that were absolutely stunning when I read them later on, and so there was one day and there's a whole chapter basically where I started, where I'm trying to figure out, what am I going to tell President Bush? And I'm flying down to the U.S. Embassy in Kabul from my headquarters at Bagram, and I'm keep kind of going through my mind, what does the president need to hear? And I had met the president because of previous jobs, and briefed him. And I knew him to be a very smart and very penetrating person, but he was going to ask tough questions. And so we had that session on a secure video teleconference, and then I went back to my headquarters, and I had to write notes to families of soldiers that had died that day, soldiers and Marines, which is one of the hardest things in life to ever do, to try to place in context what that means. And then early in the next morning, we said goodbye to some of those soldiers in what's called a ramp ceremony, where their coffins go onto a plane. And then 2 hours later, I was out in the front lines with a squad of soldiers, a very small group, if you can imagine, a 2-star general and basically a staff sergeant and his soldiers, out there right against the Pakistan frontier, all in one basically 24-hour period. And I go, that wasn't just unusual. This was happening all the time. And I decided that from that, I needed to think hard about, was any of this worthwhile for other people to see and hear? because as you said, Bob, I mean, I go from the start where I'm very, very optimistic about what we can accomplish in Afghanistan. And towards the end, you can see, or not just towards the end, throughout 15 months, I learned a lot of things that I just didn't know. My staff didn't know. And it causes me both spiritually, I say it rends my spirit, but it also mentally took me in different places. I doubted what we were going to do and what we had been trying to do. And yet at the end, I'm somewhat optimistic about what is the potential of the future, you know, and I really essentially the last picture in that book is a picture of a young soldier giving some food to young children. And I thought about it and I go, you know what? As I wrote the book, I mean, we had been 15 to 20 years in Afghanistan. Kids had gone to school that had never been to school, including girls, never, ever had any kind of education of that nature. And they had bright, bright futures in their mind. And so I wrote the book partially for those reasons, just to be able to get that out and let people know about, you know, what a human being goes through when they go through very hard circumstances like combat in Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's a very complicated culture. Hundreds of tribal affiliations, diverse terrain. It's just a really complicated society to try to accomplish the things we were trying to accomplish. And again, your time frame was what, 2008,
Yeah.
2009 time frame. But you know that those traditions and so forth have been there for centuries. There's one telling story in there where literally an entire village and the police collude, you know, to help facilitate an attack on one of your outposts. That must have been particularly frustrating and eye-opening at the same time.
It absolutely was. You're referring to the Battle of Wanat, and yeah, we thought we understood the tribes there. We thought we understood that province up in Nuristan, and truth is that people have been trying to understand that province since way before Winston Churchill was in that part of the country back in the English portion of their invasion into that area. The problem is that we didn't fully understand what we were actually trying to do, and that the police, the tribal leaders, the elders would collude with the enemy. And so we were trying to do something that made perfect sense from an American or a Western or a NATO thought process. In other words, we were basically trying to embed right inside of a village and be there to help them, you know, set up medical clinics and help them economically, help them connect to their political leaders down the road in their province, and provide security, working with the police. Well, turns out the police were against us and colluded with the enemy. So did the tribal elders. The villagers left and provided their homes. And essentially, we were surrounded by what we thought was a friendly village, and it turned out to be a very unfriendly place. We lost 9 soldiers in the space of just a few hours. Many, many airborne soldiers there fought with great heroism, and it's a story of heroism. But it was the largest loss of life by at an American base in Afghanistan. And it's something Bob, I wake up every morning thinking about those soldiers we lost, and also about their families. You know, it struck me. I mean, I had to really look hard at myself and say, you know, am I doing everything I possibly can at our over 100 locations that we had there in Afghanistan of that nature? And are we doing things the right way?
This, you know, maybe I'll make a statement and ask for your reaction, but you know, with 2020 hindsight, some things maybe make more sense now than they did, you know, when you were on the ground at the time. But, you know, now that we're pulling out of Afghanistan, I mean, is it possible that the villagers were taking the long-term view and saying, you know, we need to be friends with the Taliban because eventually the Americans are going to leave?
Yeah, no, I think your point's absolutely very well made. I don't know if that village was thinking along those ways, but I think that many other village elders and their villagers now and throughout the last decade, certainly of this ongoing war, that's now ended or ending. Probably felt the way that you said. The Taliban used to say, all you Americans, you got the watches, but we have the time. And what they meant is that eventually our, patience would run out. We are by and large, not only Americans, but just about every country that's in the G20. I mean, it's not just the West or NATO, it's others, we all have a sense of patience, or a sense of, this is how you do things over a period of time, and then you get results. And if you don't get results, well, then you make some changes. In that area of the world, in Afghanistan, again, several thousand years old of culture, but it's very mixed, as you indicated, with ethnic groups and tribes and things of that nature. There's a very different sense of time. And I don't think that we fully understood that at all. In other words, I think that village elder was just thinking, Americans, you're going to leave just like the Russians or the Soviets did, or just like the Brits did, or just like Genghis Khan did, or just like Tamerlane Lane, or believe it or not, just like Alexander the Great. I mean, my base at Bagram had been a Soviet base, but before that, back in 323 BC, that land was where Alexander the Great set up his camp. Just think about that. Same place, same location. And he wasn't any more successful than the Soviets were or the Brits. And we're going to find ourselves that, at the end result, that as far as making a real impact in Afghanistan, it's going to be questionable whether we've been successful as, far change.
You at the beginning of one of your chapters, and I'm going to unfortunately butcher this, but there's an Afghan general who used patience in a quote, I believe, and said that was the key to winning here. Let me ask a different question, because even though I'm a veteran, I'm a little bit disconnected by the factor of time. I was a Cold War era guy, right? I'm curious about mission creep, in Afghanistan. In the beginning, it was get Osama bin Laden. But over time that evolved and it changed and moved. And even though we got Osama bin Laden 10 years ago now, we're still in Afghanistan. Did we accomplish the mission and then stay for other reasons? I'm just curious. I want to be a little bit of a devil's advocate here.
No, I think, and Bob, I fully expect all Americans to ask that same type of a question. And here's the answer that I think, that I've thought through over time. On 9/11, we lost, several thousand of our fellow citizens and others, citizens from around the globe in the attacks in our country. So we went to Afghanistan with a fairly straightforward and simple mission, and which was basically to capture or kill Al-Qaeda. Bring them to justice is a broad term, but militarily, that's what we do, capture or kill. And we did that. A fair number of them fled, though, the country and went to a safe haven in Pakistan and then elsewhere in the world. We also found that the Taliban had colluded with Al-Qaeda and were not about to change their minds. And so we essentially gave a very quick ultimatum to the Taliban. They didn't take it. And so the same thing happened to them. We pushed them out of the country or captured or killed them. The issue for us then was about 2 months later. I mean, this is still in 2001, towards December or so, and then early in 2002, we look around the country and we go, okay, there's no economy other than poppy. There's no political, there's really no political, force to take the place of the Taliban. And the Taliban had by no means did it rule the entire country, although that part that it did with an iron fist. And militarily, there's no real security force. The Taliban had a very different way of organizing its security forces. And we go, holy cow, if we just literally walk out and declare victory, we're going to still look for Osama bin Laden. And we did obviously, it took him 10 years to bring him to justice. But we looked around the country and we go, if we just walk out, the Taliban's going to walk back in again. And so is the remnants of Al-Qaeda. So what are we going to do? And that, I think, was a decision we made purposefully. It's not like we just kind of backed into it and we're shocked. But we decided that we needed to establish something there. None of us ever thought, I mean, I was the lead, by then I was the lead war and terrorism planner for Secretary Rumsfeld and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And none of us were, unmindful that Afghanistan had never had a history of a central government. And it had always had a shambles of an economy. It was not, not anything that made any sense in any way that we would recognize in the West. But what we thought is we had to do something, right? And so we tried to bring along elections, which I believe in hindsight, and again, strictly in hindsight, that we did it much too early. We handed the government back to the Afghans way too early. I always remind people that when I was a kid, youngster, 1954, my dad was part of the Army of Occupation in Germany. And some of the first pictures of young Jeff Schloesser are on rubble in Germany in 1954 and 55. That's 9 years later after the end of World War II, but we, America and other allies, were still occupying Germany. That's because it wasn't ready to transition yet. We were still thought they needed the help, and we stayed there just with that mindset. My first assignment was in Germany as a combat engineer in the 70s. My son's first assignment was to Germany before he deployed to Iraq, and then later to Afghanistan. So we're still in Germany. I mean, so we made a decision. Whether that decision was right or wrong, I think is really hard. What follows, though, is by trying to then later on really nation build into the country, really try to bring it up. We put in trillions of dollars. We stayed there for 20 years. And at the end of the day, I think a lot of people look back and go, hey, you accomplished the mission way back. Why did you stay? And what good did you do? And other than, I will tell you that there are young women that were born in 2001 after we got there that are in the university now that believe that they can be businesswomen, politicians, journalists, models, actresses, singers. None of that was possible under the Taliban rule, nor will it be possible in the future if the Taliban take over the entire country. There are young, educated boys and girls that have completed school that they had no chance of going to a regular public school beforehand. They would have been going through a radical Islamic type of indoctrination, and the girls would never have left the home. Those are good things. The life expectancy in the country is now 10 years more than what it was 20 years ago. There are hospitals that actually work. So we've accomplished some good things for the Afghan people. My biggest fear is a lot of that's going to be not lasting if the Taliban take over the entire country.
Honor, duty, service. At the Veteran Crowd Network, we're focused on our next mission, bringing veterans, veteran-operated businesses, and veteran service organizations together with each other and the resources they need to prosper. That's why we are launching the Veteran Crowd Rewards Program, exclusively for our individual and corporate members. Now you can save on travel, restaurants, goods, and services from brands you trust online and at over 900,000 locations nationwide. Find out more today at VeteranCrowdNetwork.com. If you are a veteran-operated business, or a VSO, consider the connections, the network, the benefits, the engagement, and success of working with other veterans again. The Veteran Crowd Network, you paid a lot of dues to join this club.
You're listening to the Spotlight on the Veteran Crowd Network. Our guest is Jeffrey Schloesser. He is a Major General, U.S. Army, retired, and the author of Marathon War: Leadership in Combat in Afghanistan. Before we move on to just a little bit about your personal history, I just want to follow up on that last point. I think now when we leave, we're going to have folks say, well, we just sort of delayed the inevitable. What do you think is going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years? What's your fear about Afghanistan as a result of our departure.
Yeah, I think in the manner we decided to end our security role inside the country has left the country open to civil war. So I believe that the Afghan army and its Air Corps is not strong enough at this point to hold off the Taliban. I do believe that there'll be whole villages that will just like what happened in the Battle of Wanat. They'll just collude with the enemy because
They
it's
have to
the
pick a
easier.
side.
They had to pick a side, and they'll go with the Taliban because it's actually easier and maybe safer for them. I don't think the army will be able to hold large parts of the country, even in the next several months. I think you'll see that. And then what will happen is the militias that have long been inside that society will come back out. They're tribally based, ethnic based in many cases. Tajik versus Hazara versus Pashtun. Either Sunni based or Shia based, again on the religion side, and then of course the tribes. And the tribes are, whether it's the Haqqanis, it can go on and on and on. The Wardaks. You'll see the militia in some cases pile on to help the Afghan government, and they too will be in fighting. And some will just finally start to try to defend themselves, just as the Northern Alliance did, 25 years ago. That will cause probably the collapse of the Afghan political system. The Taliban will try to move into Kabul in a way that I don't believe they want to destroy Kabul like it was destroyed during the last civil war there. But they will, I think, move in. And you're going to see, therefore, those things that we've been kind of talking about. The women will be forced back into burqas. Think of it as a blue sheet with no ice, and you can barely see outside of it, head to toe. But probably more importantly, be told you can't leave the house without a male companion, and that would either be your husband or your son, and certainly not nobody else. And the whole idea of a future for women in that country, just like President Bush talked to about 2 weeks ago in an interview, is really, really going to be in jeopardy. From that, what you will see is there'll be whole areas that will essentially be reoccupied by Al Qaeda. Afghanistan is this incredibly diverse area of deserts and mountains and forests and some urban centers. There's a lot of places where the Taliban, especially, or not the Taliban, but the Al Qaeda, will be able to have safe haven, especially since the Taliban have never ceased the support for Al Qaeda. What you'll also see is other insurgent groups who really detest the Taliban, like Islamic State. They will sneak back into that country as well. They've been in the East for a couple of years now. The Taliban have been trying to fight them. The U.S. has been trying to fight them, but you'll see them come around as well. The end result of all that is not good for America. It's not good for, obviously, the Afghan people overall, especially those that have been, trying to develop a modern or a more modern society and a more modern economy. You
haven't even touched upon, some of the other strategic issues for the U.S. about having, a presence, and in the underbelly of some of our other challenges in that part of the world. General, let me shift gears on you for a second. You came into the Army, you enlisted, became a combat engineer, but then got into aviation, early in the 160th. Can you share a little bit about that experience? I just found that fascinating.
Yeah. So, it's funny. I mean, I had several mentors in the engineers, and at the end of the day, basically what they said, I'd become an officer. As I said, I went to officer candidate school, and they all
Mustang,
said, well,
huh?
I was a Mustang.
Uh-huh.
But they all said, well, look, you don't have a professional engineering degree. And so you're going to be a combat engineer the rest of your career. And I go, okay, so.
Did you always think you'd make a career of the Army when you went in? Yeah, that's it. The guys that go in thinking I want to be in, they're the ones that get out. And the ones that don't want to stay in 4 years, the ones that end up doing 30, like you. There you go.
Well, and so I tell people that I developed a 34-year career in tidbits of 3 years, and I must say that my wife, we were high school sweethearts at Leavenworth High School, and she really didn't think I'd join the Army, but I did. I come from an Army family, and my father was in the military. But I made this decision as we were leaving Germany, and I decided I would just a harebrained idea. I was going to go take the flight school test. At the time, engineer units had flight detachments, and I thought, well, shoot, I'll be a combat engineer, and I'll get some wings and get some flight pay, and I'll have some fun flying, right? Well, and so they said, okay, good. I passed the test and went off to flight school. And at the end of flight school, they said, oh, we forgot to tell you, but in the year that you've been learning how to fly, we canceled all those units. They're going out of the force, and you're going to go to be a regular aviator. And I go, okay. And within 2 to 3 years, I was actually thinking about getting out of the Army, and a shadow unit at the time called the 160th was a battalion-sized unit. We were totally covert at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I had a Department of the Army photo, Bob, you'd love it. I have a long Fu Manchu mustache. My hair is like out here. I look like I was in college, and I'm in a set of Army greens with a combat patch for the 101st Airborne Division, which I wasn't part of at the time. I was, again, in theory, part of the 160th, but the 160th really didn't exist. And I still got that photo someplace, and every now and then I take it out, and so I have no idea how I got promoted, at the time. I mean, to captain and stuff. But the 160th was doing some very unique things, flying at night when we weren't particularly doing that in the rest of Army aviation. And I decided, you know what, I'll do that for 3 years, and then I'll get out. It'll be about time for me to get out. And of course, the Army decided, well, tell you what, we'll do something else with you as well. They continued to give me other different opportunities, and and then it turns around, and all of a sudden, I'm a darn general officer. Whoever would have thought about it,
This happened while you were doing something else, huh? So, hey, we're winding down. It amazes me. I get these conversations, and the time goes by in an instant. What's next? What's next for the author and the general here? What are you doing over the next year?
Well, I want to continue to talk a little bit about this book. We've mainly been talking about Afghanistan, but the book is also about leadership in really hard times. And I came out of this really looking hard at not only the presidents, whether it was President Bush, President Karzai, then Senator Obama, but the Secretary, Bob Gates, who's on the cover of the book and who wrote a very nice, liner note for it, and many, many others, General McChrystal, Admiral McCraven, others and others like that, as well as my peers that were in the Afghan army, as well as those in the Pakistani army, and then our allies, our NATO allies. I looked at leadership that way very broadly, and I came up with 3 things. And I'd like to spend some part of this year talking about it, which is really being confident in a way that is beyond being just good at your job. And then having moral courage, which is not bravery on the battlefield. It's sometimes even harder. Moral courage is the willingness to bet your reputation. I call it bet your stars, on something that is right. You know it in your gut, and you have to vote with your feet, to use a couple of different mixed metaphors. And then finally, character. You can have both of the other two, but if you don't have character, if you don't have integrity and a sense of personal honor, you're probably not going to be the leader that I want my son to go follow or my grandchildren to go follow. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. Obviously, I'll be talking about, our 20-year anniversary for 9/11's coming up here in September. What's going to happen in Afghanistan, plus or minus. I'll probably be talking about that as far as the book. But I'd like to spend more time really looking hard at leadership, because I think those 3 things apply whether you're a president or whether you're a mom and dad just trying to get your kids to do the right thing and be a role model to them, and everywhere in between there. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for.
How do people follow you?
Well, the easiest way is to go to jeffschloesser.com. Now, everybody's going to say, I have no idea how to spell that. So
we're going to put that link on the show notes here, so people don't have to write it down, but go ahead and say that.
So that's my website, and there's a lot of fun stuff on there, but go to the blog. I do a weekly blog. It's different than what you may be thinking of. I mean, about 3 weeks ago, believe it or not, there's a day called Post-Traumatic Stress Syndrome Day. And about 3 weeks ago, I basically told how it was for Jeff Schloesser, not me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not going to tell you that after 34 years, several wars, and a lot of other intrusions around the world, that I came out of it, you know, with absolutely no impact to myself. You know, and I'm very honest with it. And as you can see in Marathon War, this is a very personal book. You know,
Yes.
I talk spiritually about some of the things that I went through. Emotionally, I talk about it. My blogs do the same thing. And plus I do make some, you know, predictions about things that are happening in the world, including Afghanistan. And I talk a lot about leadership. You know, my last blog over the last weekend was about the role of self-discipline. You know, and it applies whether you're trying to raise a teenager, make a better soldier or Marine or airman or a sailor, or trying to run a business.
Hey, our guest has been Jeffrey Schloesser, Major General, U.S. Army, retired, the author of the book Marathon War, Leadership and Combat in Afghanistan. General, thank you so much for stepping into the spotlight today. I really appreciate you being our guest.
And Bob, thanks for having me on the spotlight of VeteranCrowd. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Hey, you've been listening to the Spotlight on the VeteranCrowd Network. We come on Tuesdays and Fridays via YouTube, Apple, Google, Spotify, podcasts, and so forth. Our guest has been Jeffrey Schloesser, Major General, U.S. Army, retired author. Thank you, sir, for coming. I'll throw out a big Army Bravo Zulu to you for your performance today, folks, and that's a wrap.
Thank you for listening to Spotlight by VeteranCrowd. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information and uploads, please visit our website at VeteranCrowdNetwork.com. We'll see you next time.